There's a specific kind of silence that hums. Not the absence of sound, but the sound of absence. It's the sound of machines breathing in a climate-controlled room, the low thrum of power running through walls built deep underground, the almost imperceptible hiss of filtered air. That's the soundtrack to my life now, down here in the annex of the Blackwood Institute for Historical Preservation. At least, that's the name on the faded plaque by the service elevator. My name is Thomas Ashton, and like many who end up in jobs like this, my path here was less a career choice and more a slow slide down a path paved with bad luck and worse decisions. Lost my job coding for a tech startup that imploded overnight. Watched my savings dwindle to fumes. Saw an ad online, Archival Media Technician, subterranean facility, generous compensation, discretion essential. It screamed too good to be true, but rent was due, and my stomach had been introducing itself to my backbone for weeks. The interview process was sterile. Conducted entirely via encrypted email and automated voice prompts after I uploaded my credentials to a faceless portal. No human contact until I was approved and summoned to the institute itself, a grand, Gothic, ivy-choked building on the city's outskirts that looked like it belonged in a vampire novel. I was met not by HR, but by the head archivist, a Mr. Elias Thorne. Yes, another Thorne, the name seems cursed in these circles. He was younger than I expected, sharp features, eyes that seemed too old and too still, dressed impeccably in a dark suit that somehow absorbed the light. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Led me through deserted, echoing halls, past exhibits shrouded in dust cloths, down flight after flight of concrete stairs, deeper than seemed reasonable for a historical institute. Finally, we reached a heavy, vault-like door marked Annex, Level Gamma, Magnetic Media Archive. Your workspace, Thorne had said, his voice quiet but resonant in the enclosed stairwell. The Institute acquired a unique collection of magnetic audio recordings. Fragile. Irreplaceable. Some dating back to the earliest days of magnetic tape. Your task is simple, digitize them. Transfer the audio content to our secure servers before the physical medium degrades completely. He handed me a thin, metal-bound manual. Protocols are precise. Follow them without deviation. The Annex environment is strictly controlled. Your shift is 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., 6 days a week. You will be the sole occupant during your shift. The compensation reflects the sensitive nature of the materials and the isolation. Sensitive nature. Isolation. Understatement of the century. The Annex was a single, vast, circular room deep underground. Cold. Clean. The air tasted filtered, artificial. Racks upon racks of old reel-to-reel tape machines lined the curved walls, interspersed with climate control units and bulky server towers that hummed that specific, silent hum. In the center of the room sat a single, complex-looking digitization console, surrounded by empty tape reels, splicing tools, and diagnostic equipment. There were no windows, only the single vault door I'd entered through. The manual, much like the ledgers and binders in other such tales, was where the real story lay. The first section detailed the technical aspects, tape handling procedures, calibration routines for the aging playback machines, file naming conventions, server protocols. Meticulous, detailed, but standard archival work. Then came the special handling directives, tier gamma assets. Directive Gamma 3, temporal integrity tapes exhibiting significant temporal flux patterns, see Appendix B, waveform anomalies, must be processed ONLY between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m. local time. Ensure playback speed is manually locked and monitored. Deviation may cause data corruption. Directive Gamma 7, Bio-Acoustic Signatures recordings containing frequencies identified as BAS, Bio-Acoustic Signatures, see Frequency Chart Appendix D, require immediate activation of Filter Protocol Zeta-9 before full playback. Direct auditory exposure to unfiltered BAS frequencies above threshold 7 is strictly prohibited. Log amplitude and duration. Do not attempt spectral analysis beyond standard logging. Directive Gamma 11, magnetic structuring. Observe tape surface visually prior to loading. If magnetic oxide particles exhibit patterns resembling organic or crystalline structures, e.g., fractal branching, cellular clustering, see Visual Guide Appendix F, do not load tape. Place in designated quarantine container, QC Red, and log asset ID with code, Morphic Decay. Await specialized disposal team. Directive Gamma 15, auditory residue. If distinct audio elements, voices, specific tones, rhythmic patterns, persist perceptually after playback has ceased and headphones removed, immediately cease work. Proceed to designated quiet booth, QB1, adjacent to main console, and engage neural cleansing sequence, NCS, track 3, duration 10 minutes. Do not resume work for a minimum of 60 minutes. Log incident using code, bleed through. Repeated incidents require reporting to Thorne directly. Directive Gamma 19, the zero room. Access to the shielded chamber designated as zero room, adjacent west wall, is forbidden. Its purpose and contents are outside the scope of your duties. Tampering with the access controls will result in immediate termination and breach of contract penalties. Temporal Flux, Bio-Acoustic Signatures, Morphic Decay, Neural Cleansing, and a forbidden zero room. This wasn't just digitizing old radio broadcasts or forgotten interviews. This felt like handling evidence, or maybe artifacts of something deeply unnatural. My first few weeks were a tense education. The collection was vast, thousands of reel-to-reel tapes stored in climate-controlled shelving units recessed into the Annex walls. Most were mundane, recordings of academic lectures, civic meetings from decades past, interviews, coded meteorological data transmissions. Boring, harmless. But interspersed among them were the tier Gamma assets. Tapes marked with small, discrete symbols corresponding to the special handling directives. A tiny hourglass for temporal integrity. A stylized sound wave for BAS. A microscopic fractal for magnetic structuring. The first time I encountered a BAS tape, my heart pounded as I initiated Filter Protocol Zeta-9. The console hissed as heavy shielding lowered internally around the playback heads. As the tape played, the filtered audio that reached my headphones was mostly white noise, but underneath, I could hear something. A deep, guttural clicking, impossibly fast, layered with high-pitched, ululating cries that seemed to scrape against the very edge of human hearing. Even filtered, it made my teeth ache, my skin crawl. Threshold 7? I shuddered to think what unfiltered exposure would do. I logged it, quickly moved on, the silence of the Annex suddenly feeling less empty, more watchful. The magnetic structuring directive was triggered a week later. I pulled a tape labeled Asset G for 09 from its shelf. Before loading it, I ran my gloved finger lightly over the dark, glossy surface, as per protocol. Instead of smooth oxide, I felt texture. Faint ridges. Holding it under the console's bright inspection lamp, I saw it. The dark magnetic particles weren't uniform. They had arranged themselves into incredibly fine, intricate patterns, like frost spreading on a window pane, but with the repeating, self-similar geometry of a fractal. It looked almost alive. Growing. Code, Morphic Decay. I carefully placed the tape into the heavy, lead-lined QC red bin, a cold not tightening in my stomach. What happened to these tapes? What were they recording that could cause the medium itself to self-organize into alien patterns? Then came the bleed-through. I was digitizing a long, tedious recording, Asset G511, marked only with the temporal integrity hourglass. It was mostly static, but contained recurring bursts of what sounded like distorted, overlapping whispers, pitched too high and too low simultaneously. I processed it during the mandated 3 to 3:15 a.m. window, locked the playback speed, logged the temporal flux readings which spiked erratically during the whisper bursts, and finished the transfer. I removed my headphones, ejected the tape, logged the completion. Silence returned to the Annex. Or it should have. But faint, just at the edge of my hearing, I could still hear them. The whispers. High and low, overlapping, nonsensical syllables skittering around in my head. Directive Gamma A15, persist perceptually after playback, engage neural cleansing sequence. Panic fluttered in my chest. I scrambled towards the designated quiet booth, a small, heavily soundproofed compartment built into the wall near the console. Inside, a single chair faced a blank wall panel. I sat down, heart hammering, the whispers seeming to grow slightly louder in the confined space. Following the instructions pasted inside the booth, I put on another set of specialized headphones plugged directly into the wall panel and selected NCS Track 3. The cleansing wasn't sound as I knew it. It was a complex, shifting pattern of pure tones and subsonic frequencies, strangely calming yet deeply disorienting, similar to the calibration I'd experienced in that other place, but gentler, longer. It felt like it was untangling something inside my brain. After 10 minutes, the sequence ended. I removed the headphones. Silence. True silence this time. The whispers were gone. I logged the incident, code, bleed-through / asset G511 / 3:25 a.m. The relief was immense, but tainted by the horrifying realization the recordings weren't just sound. They were imprints. Psychic residue, as one of the key words suggested. And listening to them, even handling them, carried the risk of infection, of the sounds taking root in your own mind. The job, the isolation, the sheer weirdness, it was starting to take its toll. Sleep grew difficult, punctuated by fragmented dreams of fractal patterns, clicking voices, and whispers just out of sync with reality. I found myself obsessing over the protocols, over the cryptic warnings, over the forbidden zero room. What was stored in there? Something even worse than the tear gamma tapes. The ultimate anomaly? One night, driven by a mixture of morbid curiosity and creeping dread, I deviated. Just slightly. While digitizing a BAS tape, Filter Protocol Zeta-9 engaged, of course, I bypassed the standard low-resolution spectral analysis logging and initiated a deep scan, trying to get a clearer picture of the frequencies beneath the filter. The system strained for a moment, then displayed the waveform. It was impossible. Frequencies spiking far beyond the theoretical limits of the recording medium, shifting, modulating with incredible complexity. But hidden within the chaos, almost invisible, was another pattern. Faint. Rhythmic. Structured. Not the guttural clicking or the high-pitched cries of the BAS itself, but something else. A heartbeat? No, slower. More deliberate. Like Morse code? Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap, tap. The exact same rhythm I'd heard tapping from inside Pod 734 in my previous life, or nightmare. My blood turned to ice. Coincidence? Or was there a connection? Were the entities in those pods, the consciousness beneath the observatory, and whatever was imprinted on these decaying tapes, all part of the same, horrifying cosmic network? Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm echoed not just in my memory of that other story, that other impossible place, but pulsed faintly, almost subliminally, beneath the chaotic frequencies of the bio-acoustic signature displayed on my deep scan analysis. It was undeniably the same pattern. A complex, repeating sequence hidden like a watermark within the sonic horror imprinted on Asset G for 09. My blood ran cold. This couldn't be a coincidence. The sterile, controlled environment of the Annex suddenly felt porous, connected to other, darker realities in ways I couldn't begin to comprehend. Were these tapes not just recordings of anomalies, but potentially conduits? Ways for patterns, for influences, maybe even for entities, to bleed through the cracks between worlds? Was the morphic decay I'd witnessed on that other tape a physical manifestation of this bleed through, reality itself warping around the alien data? I hastily shut down the deep scan, erasing the logs of my unauthorized analysis, my heart hammering against my ribs. Protocol Gamma 7, do not attempt spectral analysis beyond standard logging. I had crossed a line, driven by a desperate need to understand the connection, and now the knowledge felt like poison ivy spreading under my skin. The Annex felt different after that. The humming silence seemed charged with a new, predatory awareness. Every flicker of a server light, every soft click of a relay, felt like it was watching me, judging my transgression. I became obsessed with the tapping pattern. Was it present in other BAS recordings? Other tier gamma assets? My adherence to the protocols began to fray at the edges. I still initiated Filter Protocol Zeta-9 for BAS tapes, but I started running brief, unauthorized deep scans on all tier gamma assets, searching for that hidden rhythm beneath the static, the whispers, the temporal flux. I found it again, embedded deep within a temporal integrity tape, Asset G618, masked by fluctuating playback speeds and waves of distorted voices. And again, fainter but present, in an audio log tagged only as a psychic residue, Asset G702, underlying what sounded like the frantic, sobbing confession of a traumatized individual describing impossible geometries. It was everywhere. A hidden signal, a constant presence woven into the most anomalous, most dangerous recordings in the archive. Was it the source of the danger? A marker? Or a message in itself? SOS? No, still too complex. But undeniably structured. Intentional. The bleed-through incidents increased. After processing Asset GR618, the distorted whispers lingered for hours, swirling just beyond comprehension, punctuated by that damnable tap-tap-tapping rhythm echoing inside my skull. The neural cleansing sequence in the quiet booth became a regular, dreaded ritual. Each time, it wiped the immediate auditory residue, leaving me feeling strangely calm, detached, but also hollowed out. Like something essential was being scrubbed away along with the anomalous noise. I started getting headaches, sharp, ice-pick pains behind my eyes, especially after the NCS sessions. My sensitivity to the Annex's baseline hum intensified. Sometimes it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. My focus inevitably narrowed, drawn towards the one place the protocols explicitly forbade, the zero room. The heavy, shielded door on the west wall, featureless except for a complex-looking biometric and code-locked access panel, became the focal point of my obsessive thoughts. If the tapping pattern was a key, a connection, did the zero room hold the lock? Was that where the signal originated? Or was it where the tapes themselves were initially recorded, or perhaps, created. I found myself drifting towards it during my shifts, ostensibly checking the climate control units nearby, but really just observing. The air felt different near the 0 room door. Colder, stiller. The baseline hum of the annex seemed faint to hear, almost absorbed by the room's shielding. There were no markings on the door itself, but etched into the concrete floor directly in front of it was a faint, complex geometric pattern, almost entirely worn away by time and foot traffic, but vaguely reminiscent of the fractal patterns I'd seen on the Morphic Decay tape and the light patterns from the bioluminescent swarm in that other place. A containment symbol? A warning sigil? I tried accessing any system data related to the 0 room. Access denied. Level 8 clearance required, Thorne's level, or higher. Even the environmental sensors inside the room were blacked out on my console, showing only offline. It was a true black box within the annex. One night, emboldened by lack of sleep and too much caffeine, I tried something incredibly stupid. Knowing Thorne might monitor system access attempts, I physically examined the access panel on the 0 room door. Biometric scanner, handprint, maybe retinal, keypad, card reader slot. Standard high security stuff. But below the keypad, almost hidden, was a small, circular port, about the size of an old headphone jack. It wasn't labeled. It didn't look like any standard data port I recognized. My mind flashed to the specialized headsets used for the neural cleansing sequence. They plugged into a similar, unlabeled port inside the quiet booth. Was this related? An input for a specific frequency? A way to interface with whatever was inside? My hand reached out, my finger tracing the edge of the strange port. As my skin made contact with the cold metal, I felt it again, that faint static prickle, like touching the weeping doll. And then, a jolt. Not electric, but psychic. A flash of disjointed images seared through my brain, churning grey water, a blood-red fog, the clicking mandibles of the chitinous creature, the vacant stare of the porcelain doll, the impossible geometry of non-Euclidean structures from the tapes, and finally, starkly, the tapping pattern itself, visualized as pulsing points of light against absolute blackness. I stumbled back, gasping, my head reeling, the headache returning with blinding intensity. The port wasn't just an input, it felt like an output too, a direct conduit to the raw, unfiltered weirdness archived in this place, maybe even to the source itself. Touching it had opened a floodgate, bypassing the careful filtering of the tapes, the NCS, everything. Nausea overwhelmed me. I barely made it to the small waste receptacle near the console before being violently sick. As I knelt there, spitting bile, the annex lights flickered violently. The rhythmic tapping sound returned, loud now, seemingly coming from everywhere at once, echoing off the curved walls, synchronizing into a deafening, unified beat. Tap! 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 On the console, every monitor flashed red. Warning, magnetic field instability detected. All tiers. Warning, temporal flux exceeding safe limits. Warning, BAS threshold breach, Filter Protocol Zeta-9 offline. Filter offline? My God. I scrambled back towards the console, needing to see, needing to understand what touching that port had unleashed. The main spectral analysis screen, usually displaying filtered background noise, was now a chaotic storm of impossible frequencies, spiking off the charts. And within the storm, clear as day, pulsed the tapping pattern, no longer faint, but a dominant, driving rhythm. And the sound, even without headphones, I could hear it now, leaking from the server racks, vibrating through the console itself. The guttural clicking, the high-pitched ululations, the sound of tearing fabric, the distorted whispers, raw, unfiltered bio-acoustic signatures bleeding into the room. It was agonizing, clawing at my sanity, making me want to scream, to rip my own ears off. Then, from the direction of the zero room, came a new sound. A low, grinding groan. Like stone on stone. Or like a vault door, sealed for decades, beginning to open. The groan of protesting metal intensified, echoing horribly in the suddenly amplified chaos of the Annex. It wasn't stone on stone. It was the sound of immense, multi-layered locking mechanisms disengaging within the zero room's vault-like door. Decades of silence breaking. My desperate, resonant touch on the external port hadn't just triggered alarms, it had somehow initiated an opening sequence, bypassed whatever arcane security protocols Thorne and Evil had in place. I scrambled backwards, away from the console, tripping over a discarded tape reel, sprawling onto the cold concrete floor. The raw, unfiltered bio-acoustic signatures screeched and clicked around me, tearing at my sanity. The unified tap-tap-tapping pulsed like a migraine behind my eyes. The lights flickered violently, casting strobing, disjointed shadows that made the racks of tape machines seem to writhe and sway. Magnetic fields buckled, loose metal objects, a discarded screwdriver, empty tape canisters, vibrated violently across the floor. My eyes were locked on the zero room door. It wasn't sliding open, not like a normal door. The entire circular section, thick as a bank vault, was retracting inwards, pulling back into the wall recess with agonizing slowness, revealing not a room, but absolute, perfect blackness within. A darkness so profound it seemed to absorb the flickering emergency lights, creating a hole in reality itself. And the smell. The faint, cloying sweetness that always lingered in the Annex intensified exponentially, erupting from the opening void. Rotting flowers, yes, but mixed now with something else. The sharp, coppery tang of old blood, the suffocating mustiness of tombs unopened for centuries, and an underlying, stomach-churning odor of something utterly alien, something that hinted at decay processes far beyond normal biology. I pushed myself further back, crab-crawling away, the spanner I'd retrieved earlier forgotten, useless against whatever was emerging. The tapping sound, the hidden rhythm, seemed to be emanating from that blackness now, pulsing outwards, drawing me in even as every instinct screamed to flee. Then, the whispers changed. No longer fragmented, no longer chaotic bleed-through. A single voice emerged from the blackness, ancient, dry as dust, yet resonating with immense power directly inside my skull, bypassing my ears entirely. Listener! It rasped, the sound like grinding stones. You resonate. You opened the way. From the absolute blackness within the zero room, something began to take shape. Not by emerging, but by the darkness itself congealing. It gathered, thickened, flowing like viscous ink, coalescing into a form that defied easy description. Tall. Impossibly thin, like lines drawn in charcoal against the void. It had too many limbs, jointed at unnatural angles, ending in points that seemed sharper than surgical steel. Where a head should be, there was only a swirling vortex of deeper blackness, absorbing all light. It didn't look like Thorne's chitinous form, nor the pale entity from the clock. This felt older. Primordial. An architect of the anomalies, perhaps, rather than just a manifestation. The archive of awakens, the shadow thing rasped in my mind, its formless vortex head seeming to fixate on me. The patterns released. The silence broken. Irrevocably. As it spoke, or rather, projected its thoughts, the tapes on the racks around the Annex began to react. Not just the tier gamma assets, but all of them. Reels started spinning slowly on the playback machines, unspooling dark, glossy tape onto the floor like entrails. Tape still on the shelves vibrated, rattling against the metal, some falling, shattering their brittle plastic casings. The air filled with a cacophony of distorted sound bleeding directly from the magnetic oxide, whispers, clicks, static screams, fragments of forgotten voices, all layering into a maddening wall of noise. The BAS frequencies shrieked, unfiltered, agonizing. The shadow thing drifted forward, out of the zero room's absolute blackness and into the flickering red emergency light of the Annex proper. It moved without touching the floor, gliding like smoke, its impossibly thin limbs trailing behind it. It seemed insubstantial, yet carried an immense weight, a gravity that pulled at my senses, making the room tilt, making my stomach heave. The nausea intensified, the blue patterns beneath my skin burning, tracing fiery paths across my temples, down my neck. You carry the frequency, the entity projected, its vortex head swirling, drawing closer. The constant. Miller's folly. Intended to silence, but instead, it unlocks. It harmonizes. It invites. My God. Kepler's constant. It wasn't a weapon. It was a key. A tuning fork. Designed by Miller to counteract the deep resonance, but instead, it resonated with whatever this archivist of shadows was. Had my activating it, synthesizing it, feeding it into the Upsilon channel, not just sent a signal, but summoned this thing? Opened the zero room from the inside? The entity drifted closer still, its form seeming to warp the very air around it. The temperature plummeted again, frost spreading rapidly across the floor from the zero room entrance, chasing the entity's path. Miller understood too late. Tried to sever the connection. Failed. Became part of the archive. Part of the archive? Like the voices trapped on the tapes? Was that Miller's fate? Not ascension, not transformation, but absorption? Imprisonment within this subterranean library of horrors? Your resonance is strong, listener, the shadow thing continued, hovering now only feet away. Its presence felt like a physical weight crushing my chest. Stronger than the others. You touch the source. You carry the echo. You will make a fine addition. One of its impossibly thin, sharp limbs extended towards me, slowly, deliberately. It wasn't aiming to strike, but to touch? Absorb? Archive me? No. Every cell in my body screamed in protest. The image of EM's locket, Eleanor's sacrifice, Miller's desperate research, it wasn't for this. It wasn't to become another recording in a library of nightmares. My eyes darted around frantically. Escape seemed impossible. The vault door leading to the elevator was thick, surely locked down during this chaos. The quiet booth offered no protection. The scuttling creatures, where were they? Had this new entity subsumed them? Or were they merely insignificant in its presence? Then my gaze fell on the quarantine container, QC Red, where I'd placed the Morphic Decay acetate weeks ago. Heavy. Lead-lined. Designed to contain something. What if? It was beyond insane. A desperate, suicidal long shot based on nothing but fractured implications. But it was the only shot. As the shadow thing's limb reached within inches of my face, its chilling non-presence making my skin crawl, I didn't run away. I lunged forward. Dodging under the reaching limb, I scrambled towards the QC Red bin near the wall racks. The entity seemed momentarily surprised by my unexpected move, its vortex head tilting. It changed direction, gliding silently after me. I reached the heavy container, fumbled with the complex locking latches. Designed to keep things in, not easy to open quickly. Behind me, the shadow thing drew closer, the psychic pressure intensifying, making my thoughts sluggish, my fingers clumsy. The final latch clicked open. I threw back the heavy, lead-lined lid. Inside, resting innocently on the padded bottom, was Asset Gene for 09. The tape whose magnetic surface had warped into living fractal patterns. Morphic Decay. The pattern, incomplete, the shadow thing rasped, hovering just behind me now, its chilling presence raising goosebumps despite the unnatural cold. Requires integration. It reached out again, not for me this time, but for the tape. This was it. My insane gamble. If the tape was reality warping, if the entity was drawn to patterns, to resonance, what would happen if they met? Just as its shadowy appendage touched the surface of the real, just as the fractal patterns on the tape seemed to shimmer, to react, I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed the heavy, lead-lined lid of the quarantine container down. Okay, here is part 4 of the analog listener, continuing from the moment Thomas traps the entity. Part 4. The clang of the heavy, lead-lined lid slamming shut echoed unnaturally loud in the suddenly altered soundscape of the Annex. For a split second, absolute silence reigned. The chaotic shriek of the Bio-Acoustic Signatures cut out instantly. The frantic spinning of tape reels ceased. The maddening, unified tapping vanished. Even the baseline hum of the facility seemed to falter, plunging the room into a vacuum-like stillness. Then, the reaction. The quarantine container, QC Red, began to vibrate violently, rattling against the concrete floor, emitting a low, guttural thrumming, the deep resonance, but localized now, contained, furious. The lead-lined exterior seemed to warp slightly, buckling inwards and then outwards, as if something immense and formless struggled against its confines. Frost, colder than anything I'd felt yet, instantly coated the container's surface, spreading rapidly outwards in complex, fractal patterns identical to those I'd seen on the Morphic Decay tape. The psychic pressure didn't vanish, it intensified, focused into a razor-sharp point emanating from the vibrating box. It felt like a physical blow against my mind, forcing me staggering backwards, clutching my temples as images flooded my consciousness, not the structured understanding from the signal, but raw, chaotic flashes of alien geometries, screaming voids, and the terrifying sensation of being archived, disassembled, filed away into cold, magnetic darkness. Listener, release, pattern incomplete, cannot contain. The shadow thing's voice wasn't just in my head now, it seemed to shriek directly from the vibrating container, distorted, panicked, filled with a primal fury. I scrambled further away, tripping over fallen tape reels, my eyes fixed on the violently shaking QC Red. The frost spread across the floor, reaching towards me. The lead lining, thick as it was, surely couldn't hold against that kind of power indefinitely. I hadn't destroyed it, I'd merely trapped it. Trapped it with the very thing it seemed drawn to, the reality-warping Morphic Decay tape. What would happen when those two forces interacted within the lead-line prison? The lights in the Annex, which had been flickering erratically, now pulsed in time with the container's vibrations, casting the entire room in strobing waves of emergency red and absolute blackness. On the console, the remaining functional monitors went haywire, displaying streams of corrupted data, fractal patterns blooming and collapsing across the screens. Magnetic field integrity, critical failure. Temporal stability, compromised. Reality anchor status, decoupling. Decoupling? Was trapping the entity weakening the Annex's anchor to our reality? Was I making things worse? The QC Red container suddenly lifted a few inches off the floor, hovering, spinning slowly, the thrumming intensifying into a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the Annex. The frost patterns covering it glowed with an internal, sickly green light. Cracks began to appear, not in the lead, but in the air around the container, shimmering, heat-haze distortions that seemed to bend the light, showing glimpses of something else. Twisted landscapes under alien suns. Labyrinths of impossible architecture. Fleeting images pulled directly from the Tier Gamma assets, flickering in and out of existence like faulty holograms. Release, the entity shrieked again, the sound tearing through the air, accompanied by a wave of psychic force that slammed me against the wall racks, knocking the wind out of me. Tapes rained down around me. I struggled to breathe, pain flaring in my ribs, the blue patterns beneath my skin burning hotter than ever. The nausea was overwhelming, bile rising in my throat. I could feel something shifting inside me. The resonance wasn't just present, it felt like it was responding to the entity's trapped fury, amplifying, trying to break free itself. My thoughts felt fragmented, alien concepts bleeding into my own consciousness, archive, pattern, silence, consume. No. I fought against it, focusing on the pain, on the immediate danger. The container. It was going to breach. And when it did, my eyes darted around the chaotic room. The vault door leading out was still sealed. The quiet booth offered no sanctuary. The zero room, the absolute blackness within its open doorway seemed calmer now, almost inviting compared to the storm erupting around the QC Red. But stepping in there felt like jumping from the frying pan into the singularity. Then I saw it. On the central digitization console, amidst the glitching screens and corrupted data, one interface was still partially active, brought online by my earlier Level 5 override. The controls for the Annex's internal atmospheric systems. Not just the standard climate control, but the emergency protocols. Fire suppression. Contaminant purge. An idea sparked, born of sheer animal panic. The tapes. The archive itself. It was magnetic media. Extremely sensitive to the magnetic fields. What was the emergency contaminant purge designed for? Chemical spills? Biological agents? Or perhaps data corruption? A way to wipe the archive in case of catastrophic compromise? My gaze flicked to the QC Red, now spinning faster, cracks of distorted reality widening around it, the shriek from within reaching an unbearable pitch. It was catastrophic compromise. Ignoring the agony in my ribs, ignoring the alien thoughts clawing at the edges of my mind, I pushed myself off the wall and scrambled towards the console. The floor felt unstable beneath my feet, subtly warping, like standing on the deck of a ship in a violent storm. Reaching the console, I slammed my hand onto the flickering touchscreen, accessing the emergency environmental controls. Protocol Oblivion, Magnetic Pulse Purge, confirmation required. Oblivion. Aptly named. A massive electromagnetic pulse, designed presumably to wipe every magnetic tape in the Annex instantly, irrevocably. A last resort against data theft or uncontrollable corruption. Would it affect the entity? The QC Red? The Morphic Decay tape? I had no idea. But it felt like the only weapon I had left. Confirmation required triple keycode input. My Level 5 override bypassed the first two. The third flashed on the screen, awaiting authorization, Thorne / Nightingale. Damn it. Locked out. Thorne's authorization needed. But wait. Thorne wasn't Thorne anymore. He was integrated. Part of the resonance. And I resonated now too. The blue patterns burned. The tapping echoed in my skull. Maybe I could fake it? Focusing again, channeling that alien connection, mimicking the cold, calculating intent I'd felt from Thorne, I placed my hand flat on the console's biometric scanner, not designed for me, but maybe the resonance itself was the key now. I closed my eyes, picturing Thorne, picturing his authority, projecting the command, Nightingale. Authorization accepted. Protocol oblivion initiating. T-10 seconds. Oh God. It worked. But 10 seconds? The QC red container exploded. Not outwards, but imploding with a sound like collapsing stars. The lead lining crumpled like foil, sucked inwards towards a point of intense energy where the entity and the tape had merged. For a fraction of a second, a perfect sphere of absolute blackness hung in the air, absorbing all light, all sound. Then, it vanished. Leaving nothing. The container, the entity, the tape, gone. Only faint scorch marks on the floor remained. The psychic pressure vanished instantly. The tapping stopped. The whispers died. But the oblivion countdown continued. T-5. 4. The Annex. The archive. Everything was about to be wiped. Including, quite possibly, me. Could a human body withstand a magnetic pulse strong enough to wipe terabytes of data across meters of shielding? Doubtful. 3, 2. Where could I go? The elevator was out. The service tunnels felt like a death trap. The quiet booth? Soundproofed, yes, but magnetically shielded? Unlikely. The zero room. Its perfect blackness still beckoned from the open doorway. The place the shadow entity had emerged from. The source? Or just a gateway? Utterly forbidden. Utterly unknown. But the only place potentially shielded enough, deep enough, other enough, to survive what was coming. 1. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I launched myself towards the gaping black maw of the zero room, diving headfirst into the unknown just as the world erupted in a silent, invisible wave of pure magnetic force. Diving into the zero room wasn't like entering a physical space. It was like plunging into a sensory deprivation tank filled with freezing, viscous oil. The transition wasn't marked by a threshold, but by an instantaneous cessation of everything. The blaring alarms, the strobing red lights, the palpable hum of the failing annex, the very feeling of the concrete floor beneath me, all vanished in the fraction of a second it took to cross the doorway. Absolute blackness. Deeper than any natural darkness, it pressed in on all sides, stealing the breath from my lungs, absorbing the frantic thud of my own heart. Absolute silence. Not the charged silence of the rotunda or the humming silence of the annex, but a dead, flat vacuum that felt like it could crush my eardrums. My flashlight beam, which had been cutting a swathe through the chaotic annex moments before, simply wasn't. It didn't illuminate anything, it felt like the light itself was being swallowed, extinguished the moment it left the lens. I instinctively flailed, expecting to hit a floor, a wall. My hands met nothing. I wasn't falling, wasn't floating. I simply was suspended in an infinite, featureless void. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up my throat, but even that felt distant, muffled, absorbed by the profound emptiness. Then, I felt it. Not a sound, not a light, but a pressure. A vast, slow, irresistible wave washing through the nothingness, passing through me. Protocol oblivion. The magnetic pulse. Even shielded within this pocket of non-reality, I could sense the immense energy discharge happening just outside, wiping the Annex clean, erasing the whispers, the patterns, the very magnetic souls of the tapes. It felt like a cleansing fire, terrifying in its totality. Did it work? Did it erase the resonance? Did it affect Thorne? Or Albright? The wave passed, leaving the same crushing silence in its wake. How long had it lasted? Seconds? Milliseconds? Impossible to tell. Time itself felt warped, unreliable, within the zero room. Slowly, cautiously, I tried to move. My limbs responded, sluggishly, as if moving through unseen resistance. I took a hesitant step forward into the blackness. My foot met something. Not a solid floor, but a surface that yielded slightly, like packed, damp earth, yet felt unnaturally smooth, cold. I took another step, then another, extending my hands, trying to orient myself. The darkness wasn't uniform. As my eyes, or whatever passed for sensory input here, adjusted, I began to perceive textures. Faint, almost subliminal differences in the blackness. Shapes. Structures. Not walls or furniture, but vast, impossible geometries looming in the void, angles that shouldn't exist, curves that spiraled into infinity. It felt like walking through a landscape designed by M.C. Escher, sculpted from solidified shadow. And the silence wasn't absolute either. Beneath the oppressive quiet, there was a whisper. Faint. Infinitely distant, yet intimately close. Not the chaotic whispers from the tapes, not the commanding voice of the shadow entity. This felt older. Sadder. A single, recurring, almost melodic sigh that seemed to echo from the very fabric of the void. Lost? It seemed to murmur, over and over. Asterisk, alone, forgotten, asterisk. Was this the source? The original consciousness the shadow entity served or emanated from? Or was it something else trapped here? Another victim? Another archived soul? Driven by a desperate need for orientation, for any landmark in this disorienting non-space, I reactivated my flashlight. To my surprise, this time, it worked. Not fully, the beam seemed weak, diffuse, absorbed rapidly by the oppressive darkness, but it illuminated a small area directly in front of me. That floor there was indeed like smooth, black, packed earth or obsidian dust. The geometric shapes looming around me were vast, featureless monoliths of the same material, their surfaces seeming to shift and flow subtly, defying perspective. And directly ahead, caught in the weak beam, was the source of the sighing whisper. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't an entity. It was a tape machine. An ancient, reel-to-reel recorder, impossibly large, easily the size of a small car, sat incongruously amidst the alien geometry. It looked superficially similar to the machines lining the annex walls, but older, cruder, its metal casing pitted and corroded, yet humming faintly with an internal power. A single, large reel of dark, glossy tape turned slowly on its spindle, feeding tape across playback heads that glowed with a faint, internal blue light. And connected to the machine by thick, crackling cables were not speakers, but dozens of the tier gamma tapes themselves, arranged in a semicircle around it like offerings, their own reels spinning slowly in unison. The sighing whisper emanated from the giant machine, from the glowing playback heads, resonating not through the air, but directly into my mind. Lost, alone, forgotten. What was this? A recording? Or the machine itself? Was it sentient? Was this the heart of the archive? The first recorder? The source of the patterns? As I stared, mesmerized, the tape on the giant reel reached its end. The slow spinning faltered, stopped. The sighing whisper ceased. The blue light in the playback heads died. Silence, true and absolute this time, descended. Then, with a soft click, the tape began to rewind, slowly at first, then faster, spooling back onto its original reel. As it rewound, a different sound began to emerge from the machine, faint, barely audible. Not a whisper, but a melody. A simple, haunting piano melody, filled with an almost unbearable sadness. My mind flashed back to the stories, the archives I'd glimpsed online during my frantic research in that other place. Charles Sumner, the pianist, King Creole. His mother, the voodoo witch doctor. Had Omnicorp somehow archived him? Or his music? Or his grief? Was this zero room not just a nexus, but a prison for specific, powerful psychic imprints? The rewinding stopped. The machine sat silent for a moment. Then, with another click, it began to play again. The sighing whisper returned, filling the void. Asterisk, lost, alone, forgotten, asterisk a loop. An eternal, heartbreaking loop. Suddenly, a new sensation. A faint warmth against my back. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting uselessly into the darkness behind me. Nothing. But the warmth persisted, growing stronger. And the smell, the faint scent of ozone and something else, something familiar, burning insulation. My eyes darted upwards, following the unseen source of the warmth. High above, impossibly distant in the swirling black geometry, a point of light appeared. Small at first, then rapidly expanding. Not the cold blue of the playback heads, but a fierce, angry orange. Fire. Protocol Oblivion hadn't just been a magnetic pulse. It must have overloaded systems, triggered secondary failures, fires, somewhere outside the zero room, in the collapsing Annex. And somehow, impossibly, that fire was beginning to bleed into this protected space. The reality anchor wasn't just decoupling, it felt like the barrier itself was failing. The orange glow intensified, casting flickering, monstrous shadows from the black monoliths. The sighing whisper from the giant tape machine faltered, turning into a distorted, static-filled screech, as if the encroaching heat was corrupting its playback. Error, integrity breach, anchor failing, lost. Lost? The voice in my head wasn't just sad now, it was panicked, fragmented, dissolving into noise. The warmth became intense heat. I could feel it searing my skin through the thin jumpsuit. The air grew thick, shimmering, tasting of smoke and melted plastic. The black monoliths around me seemed to waver, their impossible angles dissolving like wax. The very fabric of the zero room was coming undone. I had to get out. But how? The doorway I'd entered through, had it even existed in this non-space? Or had I simply phased through the boundary? I turned, stumbling blindly through the wavering darkness, away from the screeching tape machine, towards where I thought the entrance had been. My foot struck something solid. I fell forward, catching myself on my hands, my palms stinging against the smooth, strangely warm floor. My flashlight beam illuminated what I'd tripped over. Not debris. Not a monolith. It was the heavy, lead-lined lid of the QC red container. Impossibly, inexplicably, here. Inside the zero room. But warped, twisted, partially melted, as if it had barely survived some immense heat or force. And beside it, my heart stopped. Lying face down, partially embedded in the black, yielding surface, was the Morphic Decay tape, Asset G for 09. Its casing was cracked, the tape itself unspooled slightly. But the fractal patterns on its surface, they weren't static anymore. They were moving, flowing, pulsing with a faint, sickly green light, identical to the glow of the mother spawn's eyes. And they were spreading, flowing off the tape and onto the floor itself, etching themselves into the blackness, growing, replicating. The tape hadn't been destroyed in the implosion. The QC red hadn't fully contained the merge. Some fragment, some seed of that reality warping pattern, had been pulled into the zero room with me, perhaps during the oblivion pulse, perhaps latched onto my own resonance. And now, fueled by the failing anchor, by the encroaching fire, it was growing, colonizing this space. The screeching from the giant tape machine reached a fever pitch, then abruptly cut out as a wave of intense heat washed over me. I looked back. Flames, real, physical flames, were now licking down from the ceiling of the void, consuming the blackness, heading towards the silent machine, towards me. Trapped between the growing, alien fractal patterns spreading across the floor and the encroaching fire from above. The zero room wasn't a shield, it was a collapsing pocket dimension, a burning library, and I was caught in the middle. There was only one direction left. Forwards. Away from the fire, away from the machine, through the spreading fractal pattern. It felt like choosing between immolation and assimilation, but there was no other path. Covering my face with my arms, ignoring the burning blue lines now blazing across my exposed skin, I pushed myself up and ran, stumbling through the disorienting, shifting geometry, towards the faintest hint of something different. A subtle weakening in the blackness. A place where the void felt thinner. My only hope of escape. Right into the heart of the glowing green fractal. Running into the spreading fractal pattern wasn't like running through fire or smoke. There was no heat, no physical resistance. Instead, it felt like plunging into freezing static, an overwhelming sensory overload that bypassed sight and sound, interfacing directly with my nerves. My vision dissolved into a kaleidoscope of shifting, impossible geometries, pulsing with that sickly green light. My ears filled with a deafening roar of white noise, interwoven with fragments of every anomalous sound I'd ever heard from the tapes, the BAS clicks, the temporal whispers, the sighing loop from the giant machine, all layered, distorted, amplified. The blue patterns beneath my skin blazed, no longer just visible but feeling like channels of burning ice crisscrossing my body. The nausea reached an unbearable peak, and the world tilted, spun, dissolved. It felt less like running through something and more like being unwritten, my physical form, my very consciousness, threatening to break apart under the strain of the pattern's alien logic. Patterning complete. The shadow entity's thought echoed, twisted now, warped by the static. Requires integration, anchor. Was this it? Was I being absorbed? Archived? My mind fought against the sensory onslaught, clinging desperately to a single, anchoring thought, escape. The faint impression of a thinner spot in the void, the direction I'd been heading, became my sole focus. I pushed towards it, not with my legs, which felt disconnected, unreal, but with sheer force of will, straining against the overwhelming tide of geometric noise. How long did it last? Seconds? Minutes? Impossible to say. Time had no meaning within the fractal storm. But suddenly, the pressure lessened. The deafening static receded, replaced by a low, guttural humming. The blinding geometric patterns resolved, faded, leaving me blinking in near darkness. I collapsed onto a cold, hard surface, gasping, my body trembling uncontrollably. I wasn't in the zero room anymore. I wasn't in the Annex. Where the hell was I? Slowly, Cautiously, I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming, my head throbbing violently. The blue patterns on my skin were still faintly visible, pulsing weakly now, like dying embers. The air here was cold, damp, and thick with the smell of stagnant water, mildew, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old rust. My flashlight, miraculously, was still functional, though the beam seemed weak, struggling against the oppressive gloom. I swept it around. I was in a tunnel. Low, arched ceiling, roughly hewn from dark, wet rock. Water dripped steadily from unseen cracks, pooling ankle-deep on the uneven floor. The tunnel stretched away in both directions, curving out of sight into impenetrable darkness. There were no lights, no machinery, no sign of Omnicorp or Evilled. Just ancient, dripping rock. Had I escaped? Or just traded one prison for another? How had I gotten here? Had the fractal pattern, fueled by the collapsing zero room and the oblivion pulse, acted as some kind of chaotic, unintentional portal? Ripped a hole between the Annex's pocket dimension and wherever this was. The low, guttural humming I'd heard upon arrival seemed to be coming from deeper within the tunnel, to my left. It was rhythmic, almost mechanical, but with an underlying organic quality that made my skin crawl. It sounded familiar. Like the subharmonic resonance from below Point Astra, but rougher, less refined. My first instinct was to go right, away from the sound. But then, a chilling thought, what if this tunnel wasn't just a random cave? What if it was connected? What if the humming was the deep resonance, closer now, unfiltered? And if so, where did the other direction lead? Back towards the collapsing Annex? Or somewhere worse? Stuck between impossible choices, I opted for the lesser of two unknowns, or perhaps, the path that might offer answers, however terrifying. Gripping the heavy spanner, the only weapon I still had, I began wading cautiously through the ankle-deep water to my left, towards the source of the guttural hum. The tunnel twisted, turned, descended gradually. The air grew colder, damper. Strange, phosphorescent fungi clung to the walls in patches, casting faint, eerie green and blue glows that did little to dispel the oppressive darkness beyond my flashlight beam. The humming grew louder, vibrating through the rock beneath my feet, accompanied now by a faint, rhythmic clanking sound, like heavy chains being dragged across stone. After what felt like an eternity of cautious wading, the tunnel opened abruptly into a vast, natural cavern. My flashlight beam swept upwards, losing itself in the immense darkness high above where stalactites dripped like stone icicles. The cavern floor sloped downwards towards a large, dark pool of still water that filled the center, reflecting the faint fungal glow like a black mirror. And emanating from the far side of the pool, the source of the humming and clanking, was machinery. It wasn't evil tech. This looked older. Cruder. Riveted iron, brass fittings green with verdigris, thick, fraying cables snaking across the wet rock floor towards the pool. It looked like something dredged up from a Jules Verne novel, a bizarre amalgamation of Victorian industrial nightmare and arcane apparatus. A massive flywheel spun slowly, connected via a series of clanking chains and oversized gears to something submerged beneath the dark water of the pool. And the humming, the deep, guttural resonance, pulsed directly from the heart of this impossible machine. Standing beside the machine, seemingly tending to it, oblivious to my arrival, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, dressed in stained, oilskin overalls, their back to me. They held a long metal rod, probing down into the pool near where the chains disappeared beneath the surface, occasionally adjusting levers on the main console of the strange device. My breath caught. Was this another caretaker? A prisoner? Or the machine's architect? "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weak, absorbed by the cavern's vastness. The figure froze instantly. Slowly, deliberately, they turned around. It wasn't human. Not entirely. The face was gaunt, pale, stretched unnaturally tight over sharp cheekbones. The eyes were wide, luminous, reflecting my flashlight beam with a disturbing, milky white sheen, pupils barely visible. Greasy, lank hair clung to its scalp. It wore the oilskin overalls, yes, but beneath them, its limbs seemed too long, its fingers too thin, ending in dark, ragged nails. It looked amphibious. Degenerate. Like something that had spent too long in the sunless deep, adapted to the crushing pressure and the cold dark. It stared at me, its luminous eyes unblinking, its head tilted with a bird-like curiosity. It didn't speak, just watched, the only sound the steady thrum clank of the impossible machine beside it. What are you? I stammered, raising the spanner defensively, taking a step back. Its lips, thin and pale, peeled back slightly, revealing rows of small, needle-sharp teeth. A low click emanated from its throat. Then, it spoke, its voice a wet, gurgling rasp, like water draining through gravel. The listener arrives, it gurgled, taking a shuffling step towards me. The pattern resonates. The gate weakens. Gate? Was this machine a gate? Connected to the Annex? To Point Astra? To whatever lay beneath? What gate? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. What are you talking about? The deep song, it rasped, gesturing with a long, webbed-looking hand towards the machine, then towards the pool. She sleeps. She dreams. The machine soothes. Maintains the barrier. It took another step. But the echoes, your echo, disturbs. Weakens the lock. My echo? The resonance within me? Had my escape from the zero room, my very presence here, somehow destabilized whatever this machine was regulating? Who is all she? I asked, my mind racing. Mother? The creature hissed, a sudden flare of something like anger in its milky eyes. Nameless. Endless. Dreamer in the deep. It shuffled closer again, its movements jerky, unnatural. You carry the key. The constant. You can complete the pattern. Open the gate. Fully. Its gaze was fixed on me now, filled with a disturbing mix of reverence and hunger. Or you can be silenced. The echo erased. It lunged. Faster than seemed possible for its awkward form, it scrambled across the wet rock towards me, its long, thin fingers outstretched, aiming for my throat. The creature scrambled across the slick rock, its wet, gurgling hiss echoing in the cavern as it lunged. There was no time for thought, only primal reaction. I sidestepped, swinging the heavy spanner in a wide arc. It connected solidly with the creature's outstretched arm, eliciting a sickening crack like snapping wet driftwood. The creature recoiled, letting out a high-pitched shriek of pain, clutching its broken limb. Its milky eyes fixed on me with raw hatred. But the blow hadn't stopped it, only enraged it. It lowered its body, preparing to spring again, its needle-sharp teeth bared. The gate must open, it screeched, the words clearer now, driven by agony and a terrifying single-mindedness. The listener will harmonize. As it gathered itself to leap, the deep humming of the ancient machine beside it faltered. The clanking chain stuttered. The massive flywheel slowed almost imperceptibly. The resonance pulsing through the cavern weakened for a fraction of a second. and in that instant, the blue patterns beneath my skin flared intensely, painfully. Not just on my temples now, but across my arms, my chest, burning cold against my skin. The world seemed to warp, the cavern walls flowing like liquid shadow. The creature hesitated, its head cocking, its luminous eyes widening, as if sensing the shift in me, the sudden surge of alien energy. I didn't understand what was happening, but I seized the opportunity. Channeling the pain, the fear, the burgeoning resonance, I focused my intent, not on attacking, but on the machine. On the source of the humming that held this place in its precarious balance. If the machine maintained a barrier, if it soothed the dreamer in the deep, what would happen if it stopped? Silence, I thought, projecting the command with all the force of will I possessed, fueled by the alien energy coursing through me. Stop the song. The effect was instantaneous. The ancient machine shuddered violently, gears grinding, chains snapping taut. The massive flywheel spun wildly for a moment, then ceased with a deafening screech of tortured metal. The deep, guttural humming ceased instantly. Absolute silence crashed down upon the cavern, heavier, more profound than even the Zero Room's void. The phosphorescent fungi on the walls flickered and died, plunging the cavern into near-total darkness, illuminated only by my struggling flashlight beam and the faint, residual glow from the machine's now inert core. The amphibious creature shrieked again, but this time it wasn't anger, it was terror. It scrambled backwards, away from me, away from the silent machine, towards the dark pool of water. No, silence. She wakes, it gurgled, before throwing itself into the pool, disappearing beneath the black surface without a splash. Silence. Then, a low, guttural groan echoed up from the depths of the pool, vibrating through the very bedrock. The still black water began to ripple, slowly at first, then more violently, churning as if something colossal stirred beneath. Bubbles, thick and smelling foully of methane and brine, broke the surface. The barrier was broken. The soothing song had stopped. And she was waking up. My flashlight beam played nervously across the churning water. What had I done? In stopping the machine, had I unleashed something far worse? Then, another sound. Faint, but distinct. Coming from the direction of the tunnel I'd entered through. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Splashing through the ankle-deep water. Hope surged, foolishly. Rescue? Needled? Albright? Ashton, a familiar voice called out, sharp, commanding, cutting through the gloom. Thorne. Not the chitinous horror I'd last seen, but Thorne, the sharp-suited head archivist, striding into the cavern, flanked by two figures in similar dark suits, their faces grim, their weapons, sleek, futuristic-looking sidearms, held ready. Thorne himself looked unharmed, immaculate, his flinty eyes fixing on me, then sweeping across the cavern, taking in the silent machine, the churning pool. Report, he snapped, ignoring the impossible circumstances of his presence, his survival. Thorne? How? I stammered, lowering the spanner slightly, bewildered. The Zero Room, the pulse, you were. Irrelevant. Thorne cut me off, stepping cautiously closer, his eyes narrowed, assessing. Protocol Oblivion was contained. Partially. The Annex is destabilized but functional. More importantly, his gaze flicked towards the pool, then back to me, the primary resonance signature vanished. Replaced by, this. He gestured towards the churning water, a look of profound concern, or perhaps calculation, on his face. What did you do, Ashton? I stopped the machine, I said, pointing towards the inert device. That creature, it said the machine maintained a barrier. that it was soothing. I indicated the pool. It attacked me. I had to stop it. Thorne stared at the silent machine, then at the pool, then back at me, his expression unreadable. You stopped the lulling engine, he breathed, a note of something almost like awe, or terror, in his voice. For decades, we only ever dared adjust its frequency. The groaning from the pool intensified. The water level seemed to be rising, lapping higher against the cavern walls. A vast, dark shape began to surface in the center, immense, featureless, glistening wetly in my flashlight beam. "Thorne," I said urgently, backing away. "What is that?" "The reason for the archive," Thorne replied grimly, raising his own strange sidearm, his two companions doing the same, aiming not at me, but at the rising horror in the pool. "The source of the patterns. The dreamer. And you, Ashton," he spared me a cold glance, "have just served as the universe's most catastrophic alarm clock." The thing in the pool rose higher, shedding water like a surfacing whale. It had no discernible features, just an immense, shifting bulk of shadow and impossible geometry, radiating a cold that froze the breath in my lungs. The whispers returned, deafening now, a billion fragmented voices screaming of madness and oblivion directly into my mind. "Awake!" They seemed to chorus. "We need to restart the engine." Thorne yelled over the psychic roar, fiddling with controls on his sidearm. "It might placate her. Buy us time." But as he spoke, the very rock around us began to tremble. Cracks snaked across the cavern floor. Stalactites rained down from the unseen ceiling. The tunnel I'd entered through groaned, threatening to collapse. Point Ustra itself, miles above, must have been shaking apart. There was no time. No escape. The dreamer was awake, the station was collapsing, and we were trapped at the epicenter. My eyes met Thorne's across the trembling cavern floor. In that moment, the animosity, the hierarchy, dissolved. There was only shared, human terror in the face of the incomprehensible. He gave a single, sharp nod, a gesture of grim understanding. Then, he turned back towards the pool, raised his weapon, and opened fire, beams of pure energy lancing uselessly against the rising, formless bulk. My flashlight flickered, died. The blue patterns beneath my skin flared one last time, burning with excruciating intensity, then winked out. The resonance, my connection, was severed. Or perhaps, overwhelmed. Plunged into absolute darkness, surrounded by the roar of the waking entity and the shattering of the world, my final, fragmented thought wasn't of escape, or survival, or even fear. It was of silence. The perfect, humming silence of the Annex before I touched the zero-room port. The silence I had broken. The silence that could never be restored.